We shall now move from behaviorism into the second major group of theories, and that is cognitive psychology. In the 1960s, cognitive psychology replaced behaviorism as the leading philosophy in education. Why? There are three primary criticisms of behaviorism. Number one, behaviorism did not explain language learning. How language is learned, how young people learn language, their mother tongue, their first language, not second language. Behaviorism did not address the issue of language learning, and that tends to be a criticism for cognitive psychologists because they focus heavily on how language is learned, because thinking happens through language, through words. And for that to be understood, you have to understand what is going on in the individual's mind. Number two, it did not explain why people respond differently to the same stimulus. When a group of people or individuals are exposed to the same stimulus, why aren't all people responding in the same way? Could be said for a classroom too. When we have 20, 30, 40 students sitting in a classroom and the teacher is teaching one way to all the students, the stimulus is teaching. The teacher is sharing the information, is transferring the information to the students, but all students do not get the same amount of information or learning from what the teacher does. Different individuals respond differently to stimuli, and that was a weakness of behaviorism because it was not able to explain why that happens. And number three, it did not explain reinforcement can reduce motivation. Behaviorism is heavily dependent on reinforcement, positive or negative, whichever one. But the more reinforcement you give, how does motivation set in a young person's life? How is reinforcement motivating a student to do better? Because in real life, really, you do not get rewards for doing good work. It's expected. So why in the classroom? These were the three limitations of behaviorism that led to the rise of cognition and cognitive psychology. Two cognitive theorists are Piaget and Vygotsky, whose work in the 1950s and 60s brought about the popularity of this new science or new field in psychology called cognitive psychology. The ability to think and how thinking happens, to process the thinking in young people's minds. Let us look at a comparison where we can see behaviorism and cognitive psychology. This is a working mental model. Bandura, as we saw a little while ago, was the instrument to bridge and bring about the transition from behaviorism to cognitive psychology. Learning is social by observation, modeling, and imitation. And so we see on the left, we have behaviorism, the works of Pavlov and Skinner that we've already looked at, and then we've got Bandura in the middle, because his work deals with behaviorism and cognitive psychology both. And on the right, we have Vygotsky and Piaget, the two theorists that brought about the change in thinking in the 1950s and 60s, and cognitive psychology was born. We will be looking into the works of Vygotsky and Piaget in a little more detail as we move to the next slides. What we have here is a connection between the environment and the behavior, as you can see with the two blue arrows crossing each other. Environment influences behavior, and behavior is influenced by environment. That is critical. That's a two-way street. You cannot block it. It will move on.